let's talk draft. I know it's many months off, but college basketball, as I understand it, is underway. And I say that tongue-in-cheek because I'm the guy who, and I will always preface it with this, I don't have time. There's like 8,000 NBA games a week, and I'm trying to watch as much of it as possible. I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on in college basketball. That's why I rely on really smart people like Kyle to keep the rest of us informed until we get to draft time, and then I cram it all at once to try to figure out who these guys actually are. Cooper Flagg we've been hearing about for years, and in part for me because my buddies on NBA radio, Brian Scalabrine and Frank Isola in the mornings there. Scal has been one of the guys kind of mentoring Cooper Flagg, so I was hearing about him. It's one of the rare times I heard about a guy before he ended up really on the radar for the rest of the public. And we've heard so much hype about him for a couple of years now already that it seems like that's all the buzz. But Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, maybe others for all I know. So your piece this week, Kyle, a Thinking Draft Fan's Guide to the 2024-25 college basketball season, which is on The Ringer. Recommend everybody go read that. You have 5 pressing questions, and you start with the biggest one. Is Cooper Flagg locked at number 1? So I would just ask, aside from him being whether or not he's actually locked, is he all he's hyped to be? Is he worth tanking for? And what are scouts looking for over the next several months to determine whether he is worth tanking for and worth the number 1 pick?
Yeah, whenever somebody is that far on the horizon, meaning like we hear about them as early as we heard about Cooper. You talked about like Scalabrine, like, yeah, he was, was turned on to Cooper and went up there and worked out with him, and we started to hear. And I remember I was at a grassroots event, just kind of like checking out, just trying to get familiar with the guys. And I think this was like a couple of years ago. I had a guy, like somebody I trust was talking to me, and he was like, "You hear about this kid from Maine?" And I think Cooper was like a freshman at the time. And I was like, Maine? Like, what? It doesn't really happen a whole lot. So, and the town that Cooper Flagg is from is pretty tiny. I think it's in like the 4 digits, like Newport. So very small. He was, somebody, usually when guys get on the radar like this, we slowly kind of, you live long enough to kind of get picked apart, typically, or, we'll see guys it can vary. Like a guy will come on the scene, like an Isaiah Collier who ended up with the Jazz. It's usually these kind of big kid on campus, maybe at their position, somebody that physically dominates. And then as the class gets older, maybe that starts to maybe not translate as much, or you start to see some holes in their game, maybe in like thinking or processing the game. But Cooper was very smart, and his family, it's a basketball family. His mom played for Maine. His dad played junior college ball. He's a very competitive person, and they were steered, I think, in a smart direction. After his freshman year, they transfer him down to Montverde Academy, which is essentially a college program. I mean, they run advanced stuff. If you watch them play, they're very, very organized and accountable. But Cooper, I titled my video dive that I did from this summer about him. I said he's running towards the grind, which he is. He's somebody that he reclassified to go to college a year early. He's 17 years old right now. He's going to be 18 in December. And when you watch him play, you just see somebody who is he is wired to care about the minutia of a game in a way where he doesn't have any kind of self-sabotaging habits. He's a really invested team defender. He's one of the most like explosive, disruptive defensive players I've seen at the high school level in a long time. I like Nerlens Noel's like the last guy I remember who was, if you watched him in high school, you were just like, good God, this guy just so quick off of his feet, blocks everything. But what's been interesting over the past couple of year and a half, is that he has really focused on improving his jump shooting and his ball handling, and he has made a just incredible leap. So what we've seen is we haven't seen him stagnate in a way where we can start picking away at him, because he's been improving so much. So we've only got like 2 or 3 games of him at the college level right now, but you can go and watch my video on that or read what I say for more like, granular detail. But he's somebody that his floor is so high because of the elite kind of role player stuff that he does. I think he has kind of like a Pippen, like he's somebody to me that even if he's not your offensive primary and somebody that dominates the ball and everything runs through, he's going to apply to winning. He's sort of, people have said Kirilenko. I've said Sean Marion, Batum. Like he has those sort of like, he impacts winning in that way. So that's kind of the starting point, and he has a ceiling, I think, that can make him something even more special.
Yeah, that's interesting. He's really, really well-rounded as a young player. Like we've got the Boozer twins down here, so they matched up against them a lot. My sons grew up playing against them, so we'd follow them EYBL, and so you get to see Cooper, right? And then on all this, and he does have it, and it's going to be interesting, right? Like you would know way more about a draft than me, but I know that sometimes in those rooms, the fascination with maybe not the floor in the way that you should be fascinated with the high floor, right? Like, because that player is pro ready. Like you drop him into a pro game right now, he produces and he adds value because of what he does. And sometimes in those front offices, like maybe the best ones don't, but maybe the GMs that aren't the best, they can become fascinated with the one they think can score him 30 a game in 3 years from now, just given the opportunity to do that, right? And so Coop to me looks like, when I watched him play the other night, he looks like a pro playing in the college game. And if you didn't really know what you were looking at all the way, you might take it for granted and like to watch one of the more college looking high school guys that are just looking for buckets. Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense. I don't know if I articulated it well, right? He's just so good that you could maybe, overthink it.
Yeah, I definitely think that what you mentioned about like organizations reaching for, I think a lot of times you'll see they'll see the sort of raw materials of somebody that's a crazy athlete and they'll try to project. I mean, I think about like a Jonathan Kuminga is somebody that comes to mind, or it's just, you see these sort of raw things. Kuminga had some tools coming into the league, but they'll sort of speculate and look forward and be like, well, maybe he'll learn this, he'll learn that, thinking about some of the instinctive, mental parts of the game. Cooper has a lot of that stuff. If he's playing off of the ball, I've talked a lot about how he's a really smart, connective passer. Like when he catches the ball in the middle of the floor, he's very good at like finding where that next pass needs to be. For him, it's, you mentioned the game against Duke. I was going to ask if you'd watched that one. He to me, I think they rode him a little hard in like pick and roll at the end of that game, and you could kind of see his physicality sort of catch up with him because he is 17. He's going to get a whole lot stronger in the next 2 or 3, 4 years. But for somebody who's 17 years old playing against the team that he was playing against had like all like 50-year seniors. That's a physical challenge for a kid that age. And he held up really, really well and scored in a variety of ways. I just think that we're going to see him. I'm very, very confident if you look at the way Cooper plays versus, I mentioned those other guys like the elite role player types. If you look at him like versus the way Jason Tatum was at 17, 18 years old, are you really going to say that like Cooper can't get to the places that Jason has as a ball handler and a creator? He's already a better passer, I think, at the same age. So that's why people will ask me, they'd be like, is he really generational? People seem to get like offended by that label. I think when you think about those things, yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be somebody that could pair with like a superstar scorer and be like a winning player. But I also think that he could become a superstar scorer himself. I really think he could.
Yeah, he sorry, Howard, my bad, Kyle, but like when I watched him, the clips that you see when he's in a pro gym, right? Because there are two different styles. When you're playing with high school kids matriculating to college, I mean, it's going to look more college than it did in high school, but they're still playing kind of a high school game, right? It's just elevated a little bit. The pro game is completely different. So like when you drop him into a pro game in a pro run, or when he's playing against the Olympic squad, that's where you're like, oh shit. Like,
well, could I interject and ask you, because you have familiarity with this more than I do. I mean, well, where you say like high school and pro, where do you see that? Where do you see the where does it diverge for you? Like where you see something you're like, okay, he's playing a pro game. Like where in the details do you see that?
I see it in efficiency. I see it in ability to create efficiently, first and foremost, where it doesn't have to be a lot of flash and ball handling and over usage to get what you want. I mean, we're talking 1-2 dribbles, get to the cheese. You're talking about defensively, not just on your guy, but as that secondary, or in some cases, the third scramble guy, like what you're going to do there to disrupt somebody's jump shot. Like, to your point, like I don't even know, how many times someone at the high school level, as I've tried to say a kid is really good because he's a connector. Like, and I use that word all the time because not for nothing. My ninth grade boy is a connector, and people are like, "Oh, I mean, he didn't have 25." You're like, "You didn't watch the fucking game?" Like, you're like that's valuable. So those are the places I see it in, Kyle. Like, and I think you see him when he plays with pros. For the untrained eye, you can see it better. You're like, "Oh, there it is," right? I think you'd have people leaving that game the other night and having questions in a way that you and I don't, for all the reasons you articulated. Do you know what I mean? But like, if you watched him play with pros and he did very similar stuff, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, absolutely."
Yeah. He's not going to get rode like that, like in terms of the volume of, I mean, at the end of that game, I think part of it is like Duke's like strategic approach. I think
Yeah.
they need to
I don't think
do
that's
some,
great for him. Yeah, I don't think that's great for him long run.
and I think he's not going to be like thrown to the wolves quite like that. And I think you're going to see. I always say this about guys who are starting to who are like fledgling creators who are being depended on to create a lot of offense. Is that I always use this like aspect ratio metaphor, which is guys when they start to figure out how to play pick and roll, it's usually in a 2-on-2, and you can see it's a very narrow thing. They're like, I'm going to take this shot. If they play me this way, I'll pass this ball. It's simple. And you can kind of see as they grow and expand, you start to see it go to widescreen where, okay, now I've mastered this 2-on-2 game to the point where you're gonna have to bring help. If you watch Luka every single time is playing in widescreen. He's like this. If you play him 2-on-2, you are gonna lose every single time or most of the time. And I think that Cooper is very early in that sense that you could see he can take his man, he can make that pass over that roller pass or whatever it is. And I think we're gonna start to see him expand as the season goes on. So I think what you're saying about people maybe watching him get strained to the point of his limits as what he can do. I think we're going to usually what I look for with guys like that who get strained to their limits is, okay, you failed. What do you grow after failure or are you going to plateau? And I expect based on what I've seen from Cooper, he's just a sponge, man. And if you listen to him talk, he's a motherfucker, honestly. Like he's super, super competitive. So I don't underestimate him in any way, shape or form.
That's a really good point, Howard. Again, dude, I apologize, but I'm kind of like it's interesting, right? Because when you start with pick and roll, you do start. It's 2v2, right? And the first read is the big and how he plays. And does that allow you to have an opportunity coming off of that pick and roll, or are you going to put him in his tough spot? And now we're looking at our big. Once you've gotten good at that, now you're going to add the third player, right? Like I like to teach it first out of side pick and roll. So I'm going to add the strong side corner. So now I read the tag guy and I can play behind pick and roll, right? Like, but you're building the IQ. Then we're gonna add the weak side defender. So we have someone, if they plug from the nail, we're gonna spray it and we have a swing to the corner. And so my original point about not being good for him, when you explained to me, like it is good for him. I would just there's a balance there of like riding him so that he can develop those true number one playmaking skills, and then understanding when he is 17 late down the stretch, and maybe like we figure something else out and then go back to him. I want to ask you though, because I have a nephew that plays on Rutgers. He transferred in from Merrimack, so I get to see Ace and Dylan a little bit. And Ace is one of the guys that I was kind of talking about a few conversation pieces ago for myself, where he's like, "Holy shit, dude, that's crazy." Like from a shot creation standpoint.
You said it. Yeah. You know who he reminds me of at the same age as Michael Porter Jr.? I mean, that's kind of what he reminds me of. When you watched MPJ in high school, you were like, this dude can create his shot. He's just like 6'10" Klay Thompson. It was like anytime he wants, he can go get it, which can be the thing about a guy developing a tool like that is so dominant when you're at that. And you'll watch those guys who can go just dribble, pull up, create whenever they want. You can see them stagnate, like we were talking about. You can see them sort of like get to a place where they're not getting challenged as much anymore. And I think that did happen for Michael Porter Jr. Ace is an incredible dribble pull-up shooter. I actually think he's a little more fluid in his handle, getting to his spots.
Yeah, the MPJ.
Yeah, yeah. The big question is for me is, and I'm going to be curious to watch this over the course of the year. Is how does he expand beyond that? His decision making is I'm a little less sure about. I'm very sure about him being a shot maker and being somebody who can be on a team. Maybe he gets in a right situation where he's not burdened in terms of what they're expecting from him. Like playing next to Jokic is a godsend for a guy like Porter Jr. Because it kind of puts what he does well into into an efficient box. Whereas if he were outside of that box, I think you might start to see some of the stuff that could make you, want to pull your hair out. But for Ace, yeah, man, he's just an incredibly skilled scorer. And I think if he does start to demonstrate some of those decision-making qualities and you start to think like, okay, I can see this developing down the road. He's somebody that I'm not saying it's a significant chance, but there's more than 0% chance somebody could talk themselves into like the upside here is pretty crazy and consider him over Flagg. I wouldn't, but it's possible.
Right.
Well, that's part of the fascinating discussion about draft evaluation period and the conversations that front offices have every spring, right? About, floor versus ceiling and what feels like a sure thing versus like, and everybody, we talked about this earlier in the week about the Strohmeyer Swift effect of being or actually, I guess it was a week ago when we had Shane Battier on, but just talking about like being just so enamored of and caught up in a guy's athleticism, their hops or whatever. Like, oh, imagine if he figures out how to do X, Y, Z. And then you've got Cooper Flagg who's already figured out X, Y, Z, but maybe doesn't have, but it sounds like, Kyle, what you're saying is like the floor is going to be high regardless. There is a high ceiling for him potentially as well. It's not like, he's going to come in fully formed and this is just it. He'll just be a really high level role player. But something that you said actually did catch my attention. And I think listeners might have gone, for a minute. When you compare him to Nick Batum and Sean Marion, like these are guys who are incredible players, who are winning players, impact players, but they're like best as like your third guy at most in those cases, right? Like Raja, like that's fair to Sean, isn't it? Like, Nash, Amari, then Sean.
If Sean's listening, it's not fair to Sean. If Sean's not listening, there were a lot of cases where he was better as a three. Tricks, you're my guy.
But Sean's awesome. Sean had a phenomenal career. And, but I can think even in your piece this week, Kyle, you allude to the idea of Cooper Flagg as maybe being in a Pippen mold. And then people, like that is no knock at all, obviously. But I wonder where the line is.
If you knock Scottie Pippen, I automatically tune out anything else you say. Like, I mean, I'm just like, all right, I know who you are, basically.
And yet there are people.
Sorry, you didn't, Howard. I know. Yeah. I'm just saying in general, which speaks to my point of like, role is this word that like it's like a stinky word amongst like the real hooper community. If you say role, they're like, oh, it's like it's a team game, guys. You need Pippen's. I said this in the piece that like Pippen's success with Michael Jordan's success is inextricable from Scottie Pippen. And like you were there for this, Howard. Like Pau Gasol he wasn't the primary on those 08, 09, 10 Laker teams, but he was instrumental. You have to have, so as much as we want everybody and we judge your sort of your credibility based on whether or not you're leading in scoring or whatever it is, like these are the guys. Drew Holiday is another guy like this. You have to have them. They get you over the hump. You need both. So I don't take it as an insult like at all for if people out there take it that way,
Definitely not. And I wouldn't think of it that way either. But when we're talking about number one overall pick, I think people think like, well, I don't want my number one overall pick if it's my team. I don't want him picking a Nick Batum or a Sean Marion, as great as those guys were. It's number one overall pick. I need it to be, LeBron, Anthony Davis, Anthony Edwards, whoever. And so I wonder where the line is there, or just fill in the blank there about like if people are hearing on the one hand, definitely impact player, definitely a winner, but might be in this like almost like co-star or 1B role as opposed to 1A. But okay, but then why are we talking about him as number one? Give me the sense of like where that line is for you, or where you think it applies to Cooper Flagg, and then branching off of that. Okay, well that's probably why Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, and maybe others are still in the conversation and could still overtake him, because teams have the same feeling too. Teams sometimes also will talk themselves into, well, I need the guy who can drop 30 every night.
Primary
if it's
scorer.
the number one overall pick, right?
Primary scorer. Yep.
Yeah. Rob Mahoney and I talk about this from time to time. It's just, there's this like broader kind of philosophy thing that goes on when you talk about the NBA draft. I know an example is like Paolo versus Chet. I thought was like an incredible example of this, where Paolo he projects to be, and I think we all want him to be, like a championship level guy who's like the main option, like can carry that load. And Chet is, I don't know if Chet's ever going to be that, but the range of things that Chet offers are different. And it kind of makes you wonder about like, is a primary option always better than, where is that line? When does a primary option who's pretty good stop? When do you pick the secondary piece who does a wider range of things, even though they can't, so how do we figure that out? Is it efficiency? Is it maybe they don't quite score? Like, I mean, Julius Randle's a guy who like he aspires to be like a primary option, but he has a lot of kind of self-defeating habits that kind of remove him from that conversation. And like, I'm trying to think of a comparison for a role player who is probably like a Drew Holiday, I guess, is another, like he'll never probably score as much as Julius does, but he also doesn't hurt you with the things that he pursues. So for me, I look at this draft class, every class is different. That's the simple answer that we say every single year. I think that maybe this one isn't as strong as like a 2018. That draft had, Shea, Luka, Trey, it had a bunch of guys who were primaries, but this draft has a guy that I think is going to fit on, I always call them universal donors. These are guys that Cooper could play on any team in the league and do what you ask him to do it, and do it really well. Like, I think he's going to be somebody that could be a catch and shoot player in the 35 to 40% range pretty easily. I don't doubt that at all. I think he's going to be an awesome help defender. He's an awesome passer. He's spatially really smart. So I think his fail rate to me is very, very low. But I think that, this idea of what you need to get year to year with the number one pick, it's just kind of a flawed way to think, I think, and it causes a lot of teams to overreach and make big mistakes. I think we see that every single year. Yeah.